I still haven't given it up yet. Uh, it's
Is there any loss more painful than becoming an American legend, only to end your artistic life with hands that can no longer stop trembling? Neil Diamond, the man who could make all of America rise to its feet with just a single melody. He wasn't just a singer, he was the heartbeat of an entire generation. He gave the world Sweet Caroline, the song that echoes through weddings, the joy and sorrow carried by millions. But behind those cheers were layers of pain the audience never saw. Behind the dazzling lights was a body that had begun to betray itself. And behind that legend was a man singing through aches no microphone could ever record. The voice that helped shape America was built from damp little apartments in Brooklyn, from years of rejection that hardened him from 2 fractured marriages and from a tumor that once threatened to take away his legs. Now, at 84, even with more than $300 million to his name, Neil Diamond's life has entered its most tragic chapter, a chapter where he forces himself to endure daily, relentless pain. And before we begin, if his music has ever touched you, leave a heart as a small tribute to the man who sang for the whole world, even when he himself was hurting. Some hearts are born with wounds that not even an entire childhood can heal. Neil Diamond carries one of those hearts. His story does not begin with stage lights or applause, but with silence. The kind of silence that slips through the thin walls of run-down Brooklyn apartments, that fills evenings with nothing but the groan of old pipes and the quiet sighs of exhausted adults. One day, the world would call him a legend, but in the beginning, he was just a skinny little boy learning how to survive between wartime air raid sirens and the quiet fear hidden in his parents' eyes. Neil Diamond was born on January 24, 1941 in Brooklyn, New York, at a time when World War II was tearing the world apart. His parents, Akiba Kiev Diamond and Rose Diamond, were Jewish immigrants from Russia and Poland, 2 people who carried their faith in their sleeves and hunger in their pockets. By day, his father went door to door, arms full of merchandise, chasing every nickel and dime through the biting cold wind. By night, Rose sat by a rickety table, counting bills one by one, her lips pressed tight, as if afraid a sigh might escape. Winter leaked in through warped window frames, and summer heat pressed onto the walls until they felt like they were burning. There was no most beautiful season, only days that had to be endured. The family moved from one cramped apartment to another, and from that, Neil learned a harsh truth early on. Nothing really stays. Not warmth, not the feeling of safety. Sometimes even gentle touches dissolved like smoke. When his father was drafted, the already unstable world of the little boy completely collapsed. Rose gathered what little they had left, stuffed everything into a few cheap suitcases, then clutched her 2 sons tightly as they boarded a train to Cheyenne, Wyoming, a place so vast that to Neil it felt like another planet. No friends, no relatives, only the sound of wind slicing through unfamiliar streets and the constant feeling of being an outsider. At night, while his mother mended clothes under the faded yellow light, the needle clicking softly against the fabric, Neil quietly stepped out of the small room. He wandered to the local movie theater, the only place where darkness wasn't frightening. He sat motionless in his seat, watching cowboys on the screen, riding horses while singing, their voices steady, their faces calm, as if heartbreak had never existed. Those simple melodies reached him in a way no words of comfort ever could. It was there, amid the smell of old buttered popcorn and dim lights, that he learned a truth: a song could make loneliness bearable, even a little beautiful. Years later, Neil looked back and said, "It wasn't an easy home, but it was full of love and a lot of quiet. I think music became the way I talked to the world when words stopped being enough." When the war passed, the Diamond family returned to Brighton Beach. The air there was still salty and heavy with the scent of hard-earned survival. The boy who once watched his father disappear in a military uniform now stood before the ocean, wondering if he would ever find a place where he truly belonged. Neil was shy, introverted, always standing just a little bit behind everyone else. He wasn't loud, but his eyes missed nothing. While the neighborhood kids played stickball on the streets, shouting down the entire block, he sat by the window scribbling lines onto scraps of paper. He didn't call it poetry. It was simply his attempt to untangle the vague feelings swirling inside him. Then, at 15, something miraculous appeared in the most ordinary form, a $9 guitar. His parents could barely afford it, yet they brought it home anyway. The guitar was old. The wood scratched the strings out of tune, but to Neil it wasn't an object. It was an escape. Under the small desk lamp, he sat for hours fumbling through chords. The tips of his fingers stung and bled, but he kept going. For him, the guitar wasn't entertainment. It was the only thing that helped him hold on to life. It gave him a voice when he didn't know how to speak. It turned everything he carried inside into sound instead of letting it weigh on him forever. That same year, he wrote his first song, Hear Them Bells, as a gift for a girl at school. A clumsy teenage crush, but for Neil it felt like a rite of passage. He realized that music could make him feel seen, even when no one was actually looking at him.
Hear them bells, the story of our love.
At 16, Neil's grades plummeted, but inside him another kind of hunger, awakened not the hunger of food, but of meaning. As the son of immigrants who had known deprivation, he feared above all a life that felt empty. And that fear pulled him toward the guitar. A skinny Brooklyn boy holding an oversized instrument, yet whenever he touched it, everything fit. Neil's legend began in that very emptiness. Those years, survival itself was a kind of craft. Neil counted his coins in the dark so no one would see how small his dreams were. Some nights he held the guitar not to play, but to find whatever warmth was left. The city didn't pity him, and he didn't ask it to. He simply kept moving forward because inside him lived a yearning louder than the noise of New York traffic. In 1958, everyone around him thought they saw Neil's future clearly. A smart Jewish kid from Brooklyn awarded a fencing scholarship to New York University studying pre-med, a path so right it was hard to criticize. His teachers saw a future doctor, but what Neil heard was melody. During anatomy classes, while his classmates buried their faces in diagrams of the human body, Neil's mind drifted out of the lecture hall and walked straight toward Tin Pan Alley. After class, he carried his old guitar across the streets to the music publishing buildings steeped in cigarette smoke, ink, and ambition. He knocked on doors repeating the same simple request, "Can I play you a song?" Most of the answers were no, not polite no's, the kind of no's that shut the door and the dream in his face. But the next day he returned, and the day after that. Each rejection was like another heavy brick, but instead of crushing him, it slowly built a will. If no one would open a door for him, he would have to build one himself. By 1960, Neil did something many considered insane. He dropped out of college only 10 credits shy of graduation to take a job writing music for $50 a week at Sunbeam Music Publishing. On paper, it was a job. In reality, it was a gamble. $50 a week in exchange for a tiny chance in an industry known for swallowing and discarding anyone brave enough to dream big. The Sunbeam office was so small that opening the door sent wind sweeping through the entire room. The piano was out of tune, winter crept straight into his bones, and Neil wrote until his hands and feet went numb, his stomach growling hollow, yet somehow his heart felt strangely full. The editors listened, then shrugged. Too sad. Too strange. Too honest. This market prefers imitation over sincerity. Then one day, Sunbeam decided to give up. Neil suddenly became invisible on the streets of Manhattan, young, poor, and seemingly unnecessary to anyone. His world shrank into a rented room where hope was so tiny it barely rose above a whisper. He survived on 35 cents a day, enough for a cheap cup of coffee and a loaf of bread if he was lucky. Some nights, instead of sleeping, he wandered the streets just to borrow a bit of warmth leaking from brightly lit windows. Eventually, he found shelter in an attic above the Birdland Jazz Club, a dusty storage loft the city had nearly forgotten existed. At night, the sound of saxophones and drums drifted up from the floor below, blending with the white puffs of breath in the frigid room. Neil sat before a broken piano, pressing off key notes until the tips of his fingers bled. Later, he recalled it without the slightest exaggeration. "I wrote because I had nothing else left to hold on to." And from nights like those, from hunger, from the cold, from an endless string of no's, a legend began to carve itself slowly, not on the charts, but directly onto his soul. In 1962, Columbia Records tossed him a tiny lifeline, a single called Clown Town. He walked into the studio with hope shining in his eyes, but when the record came out, the world stayed silent. The single sank without leaving a ripple. Another door closed, another layer of pride peeled away, but he didn't turn back. Failure gradually became a quiet companion, never leaving, never comforting, simply trailing him like a shadow. By 1965, something finally shifted. "Sunday" and "Me," a song Neil wrote for Jay and the Americans, unexpectedly reached the top 20. For the first time, a song he had written was being sung across America, even if the voice wasn't his. It wasn't fame yet, but it was the first sign that what he carried inside when put into music could find a way to be heard. From here, the light began to shine down, though the darkness did not disappear. Signing with Bang Records brought his first real successes, but also a new kind of chain. They wanted easy, sweet, bright, sellable hits. Neil delivered lyrics full of blood edges and truth. He later said, "I gave them blood. They only wanted sugar." He wasn't born to pretend, not in music and not in life. Through hunger, cold rooms, and countless rejections, Neil Diamond understood one simple thing. The moments he was abandoned were the moments he heard himself most clearly. The boy who once sang only to the walls of a Brooklyn apartment had finally found his true voice. In that freezing loft above Birdland, the earliest pieces of the Neil Diamond sound began to take shape. He wasn't rich, wasn't famous yet, but he had achieved something many never managed to do in New York. He survived, and he turned the city's brutality into music. Once he sang in darkness. Now those songs were lit up from car radios, jukeboxes, and bars, wedding halls where people danced together under neon lights. America had begun living alongside his melodies, even if the name Neil Diamond was not yet etched into their hearts. Everything truly changed in 1966, thanks to a song that Neil himself didn't even sing. "I'm a Believer." The track he wrote for the Monkees exploded across the United States. 1 million copies sold out before stores could restock their shelves. With just one song, the songwriter who had been rejected over and over suddenly became the man behind a national sensation. But fame has a cruel habit. It sends the song to the summit while leaving the writer standing in the shadows. His lyrics helped strangers embrace dance, fall in love, while he still walked home alone under the flickering streetlights of Manhattan, shoes soaked with winter rain, collar pulled high against the wind. "I was happy for them," he whispered years later. "But I knew I had more to say. My own story." And then in 1969, America found its own anthem, Sweet Caroline.
Sweet Caroline.
1 hour in a Memphis hotel room. A moment of sudden clarity, a melody rising as if it had been lying in the dark for years, waiting to be touched. Neil said he wrote it for the innocence of a child, but when the tune took shape, it became a song for anyone who had ever needed a reason to keep going. A small flame of hope that refused to go out. "It's miraculous," Neil recalled. "They made the song their own." From that night on, Sweet Caroline was no longer just a track on a playlist. It became a ritual. Stadiums erupted, wedding halls shook, bars overflowed with strangers throwing their arms around each other, all exploding together at the chorus. But for the man who wrote it, Every shouted, "So good, so good," was followed by a quiet pause inside his soul. "The world found connection in my melody," he said softly, and I remained the lonely man standing behind it. The 1970s placed a crown on Neil Diamond's head, but even a king must bleed to keep his throne. Songs dyed with the colors of America's boom era. The bright pink of romance, the deep blue of loneliness, flooded radio stations everywhere. Each album climbed higher than the last. Each tour swelled into a storm of lights. The stages grew larger, fireworks exploded, and crowds screamed as if they never wanted him to leave. The world saw the light, but Neil saw flames catching onto himself. In 1972, at the Greek Theater in Los Angeles, he performed 10 nights in a row before crowds that were nearly delirious. Hot August Night wasn't just a live album, it was a phenomenon. 2 million copies sold, clinging to Australia's charts for 2 years straight. Yet backstage, the man who had just made thousands jump onto their seats and scream collapsed into a metal chair, his shirt drenched in sweat, his chest rising and falling as if he had run out of air. "Every night I gave everything I had," he said. "And when it was over, nothing remained." Neil's dressing rooms in those years didn't resemble a star's retreat. They felt like rooms exhaling exhaustion. The makeup on his face melted into long streaks of sweat. His breath fogged up the mirror, and the man staring back looked so unfamiliar that Neil had to pause a few seconds just to believe it was himself. Outside, the audience roared like thunder. Inside, there was only the buzz of fluorescent lights and his hands trembling slightly around a cold water bottle. Before he could steady himself, the phone rang. Broadway wanted him. The Winter Garden Theater, once owned by Sinatra's Presence, was now sold out for 20 nights because of a man who had once wandered New York with 35 cents in his pocket. Columbia Records offered a $5 million contract, a number that the poor boy he once was would have laughed at, thinking it belonged to someone else's life. Glory, as always, demanded a price paid in blood. Neil rehearsed 12 hours a day, revised every lyric until his fingers cramped, sang until his throat burned dry, recorded until dawn blended into noon without him noticing. His spine ached as if carrying the weight of every hit he had ever written. Later, he confessed, "I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the man staring back. I was chasing perfection, and perfection was killing me." Then one day, everything changed. No warning, no signal, just a single violent turn strong enough to bring even a man of steel crashing down. In 1979, in the middle of thunderous applause and blinding stage lights, Neil Diamond suddenly collapsed. Not from fatigue, not from the exhaustion of dozens of sold-out nights, but from a sharp, icy pain slicing down his spine, as if someone had yanked away the final support holding his body together. People thought he merely stumbled, but when Neil was helped backstage, his legs no longer obeyed him. Cold sweat soaked through his shirt, and his face had turned as pale as a sheet of paper. Doctors said there was a tumor pressed close to his spine, silent, stubborn, and so dangerous that a tiny mistake during surgery could leave him unable to stand ever again. The surgery lasted 12 hours. Everyone waited outside, not knowing what was happening. It felt as if the whole world was holding its breath. When Neil opened his eyes, the hospital lights blurred before him. No one knew what he would say. No one knew whether he could move. But the first words that slipped from his cracked lips were not, "Am I okay?" They were, "Will I still be able to sing?" In that very moment, people understood that Neil Diamond did not live on heartbeats or breath alone. He lived on his voice. Neil Diamond had conquered stages, charts, and massive concert halls, but in return, he had to hide the exhaustion no audience ever saw. After each performance, once he stepped away from the lights, he was left with a body falling apart and a melody that hurt him more than it healed him. He once said with disarming honesty, On stage, I feel more alive than ever, but also the most exhausted. And when the applause finally faded, only one thing remained loud inside Neil, the emptiness that fame could never fill. As for his film career, Neil's journey was never a red carpet. He entered Hollywood only because he wanted another way to tell his story, but cinema treated him far colder than music ever had. Jonathan Livingston Seagull carried great expectations, but the film collapsed disastrously. Yet what hurt him most wasn't the revenue it was seeing the music he had written. From his very heart, cut up, rearranged, reshaped without anyone asking his permission, Neil said one line about it soft but bitter. It was like someone edited my soul without asking. He swore he would never touch film again, unless he had full control. But life never allows people to hold on to vows for too long. In 1980, Hollywood handed him The Jazz Singer, along with a record-breaking paycheck. Neil knew that every rose had thorns, and indeed, when the film premiered, critics shredded it without mercy. They mocked it, they laughed, they sneered. Yet the songs from the film moved in the opposite direction. Love on the Rocks, Hello Again. America. Those melodies climbed the charts as if they were defending the very man who wrote them. When reporters asked Neil what he thought of the criticism, he merely shrugged. They can laugh at the movie, but they can't touch the songs. When the stage lights dimmed and the microphone was hung back on its stand, Neil no longer faced applause, but something far more persistent, the silence of his own home. He had conquered the cheers of the world, but in the quiet moments, after every show, he felt a different distance growing, not measured in miles, but in how many times the hearts of the people he loved had to comfort themselves. Before all the lights, before the fame, there was only Jay Posner. They met in Brooklyn in the hallway of Erasmus Hall High School. Two kids holding dreams too big for their age, not yet knowing that those very dreams would one day be what broke their hearts. Jay was gentle, steady about the road ahead. Neil was restless, as if a melody were calling his name, and he didn't yet know what it was. Their 1963 wedding was so quiet it was almost a secret. No glamorous guests, no flashing cameras. Just two young people standing before each other, believing love alone could shelter them from every winter. The years that followed were filled with simple things. The scrape of a red pen across school papers, the sound of guitar strings near a cracked window frame. Brooklyn cold biting into his knuckles as he tried to write one more line before dawn. In 1964 and 1966, two daughters, Marjorie and Ellen, were born. The apartment grew smaller, the nights shorter, the money never enough, but their hearts were full. Neil held his babies, humming unfinished melodies as lullabies, songs the world would someday sing, though at that moment they existed only for the two little girls in his arms. For a while, dreams and love seemed able to walk side by side. Then success came not like a flickering lamp, but like a spotlight directly into his eyes. "I'm a Believer" exploded across America. His name began appearing on the charts, while at home his name became something his family learned to wait for. He traveled, wrote, recorded, toured. Jay stayed tucking in two children alone, watching her husband appear on television more often than in the chair across from her at dinner. Years later, Neil said, "The kids cried. My wife cried. I cried too. But I had to go." He was trapped between the stage and his home, and one day the love inside that small apartment became so thin that a single touch could tear it. There were no fights, no slamming doors, just two good people standing before a dream that had grown too heavy. The night he left, Jay stood silent in the doorway, out of tears. The two girls slept soundly, unaware that their world would change by morning. Neil kissed each one, then stepped into the rain. Somewhere out there, a song he had written was playing. The world was listening to him, except the home he had just walked away from. And in the space that his marriage left behind, another name began appearing at the edge of his story: Marcia Murphy. Some said her presence had flickered backstage even before the first marriage broke apart. But whatever the truth was, Marcia entered Neil's life not as temptation, but as a quiet form of mercy. She was a television production assistant with gentle eyes that were anything but naive and a kind of steadiness that could make even confident men hesitate. Marcia did not love the legend the world would later adore. She loved a man still bruised from all the promises he had failed to keep. They met at the border between an ending and a beginning, when the spotlight was just beginning to flare and Neil's heart was still limping from all the losses he could not fix. Marcia didn't try to mend him. She simply stayed unafraid of silence, not demanding new songs, not asking for explanations. She didn't need me to perform, Neil remembered. She just listened. With her, he experienced a kind of peace that didn't need to be shown off. The noise inside him, the noise of stages charts, expectations began to quiet. He called that feeling the first breath after nearly drowning. They married in 1969. For Neil, it felt like being allowed to come home again after years of sleeping on the street. Their new house in Laurel Canyon, Los Angeles, was filled with warm sunlight slipping through tall windows. Guitars leaned against the walls. Morning coffee mingled with the clicking of pens on lyric drafts. Neil played piano barefoot in the kitchen, the laughter of little Jessie one day echoing down the halls before falling silent again whenever his father left for another trip. In those early years, love had a clear rhythm: morning coffee, afternoon studio, evening family. In 1970, Jessie was born. His newborn cries blended with the forming rhythm of Cracklin' Rosie. 8 years later came Micah, almost at the same moment. You Don't Bring Me Flowers entered the world, a coincidence that in hindsight felt like a warning. Family and fame stacked atop each other like two layers of music. One warm, one blinding. Neil recorded the baby's first babbles onto tape, tucked family photos inside his guitar case, whispered lullabies that months later would be performed on stages across the ocean. There were fleeting moments around the dinner table when he believed he had outsmarted fate, that he could be both a legend and an ordinary man. I thought I'd learned the lesson, he said later. Thought this time I could keep both the dream and the love. And he did. But only for a while. And because it was so beautiful when it cracked, the pain was nearly beyond words. The 1970s turned Neil Diamond into one of the most famous people on the planet. Sold-out arenas, radio waves filled with his hits. But each tour grew longer, louder, and lonelier. He traveled so constantly, he had to check his room key to remember which city he was in. Applause became the only thing he could rely on. Marcia tried to believe love was strong enough to hold their family together, but Neil was slowly burning out. He wrote through pain, performed with fevers, smiled when he had nothing left to give. By the late 1980s, they both understood the truth. No one wanted to say he could not give himself entirely to the stage and still have enough left to bring home. The second marriage ended quietly. No fights, no slammed doors, just two people sitting across from each other, knowing they had reached the end. In 1995, they divorced after 26 years. The $150 million settlement shocked the world, but Neil said only, "She deserved every penny." And as the house emptied, Neil stood in the silence created by his own career. The man who had turned loneliness into melody now heard that loneliness echo back at him louder than any stadium he had ever stood in. He thought that after so many songs about love and loss, his heart would finally be empty. But life had no intention of letting him rest. In 1996, at 55, Neil was no longer the Brooklyn boy. He had crossed continents carrying promises gathered from city after city, most of them made to audiences, few made to himself. And then in Australia, he met Ray Farley. She didn't see a legend, she saw a man who didn't know how to rest. A sharp-minded businesswoman with a straight back and calm eyes, the kind of calm born from having endured enough hurt without letting it turn into bitterness. The way she looked at him was like sunlight noticing dust, not intense, just gently revealing what had always been there. When they met, Neil was still wandering through the ruins of a 26-year marriage. He walked through success like a man lost inside his own home. Ray was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes the noise retreat. "She made me feel young again," he said. "She reminded me who I was before the noise began." They started as friends, and that friendship thickened into something deeper, steadier. Then around 2003, Ray's back injury brought everything to a halt. Surgery risked slow recovery. For the first time in decades, Neil stopped running. He stayed home, stayed by her hospital bed, holding her hand through sleepless nights. He cooked clumsily, read to her, sat still while she slept. It was no longer a grand Hollywood romance, but something fragile and tender and enduring. But even love has a lifespan. By the late 2000s, when Neil was nearly 67, distance returned, this time soft as dust settling on a guitar. No one plays. They were still kind, still gentle, but their rhythm had shifted. Laughter became memory. Long conversations shrank into a few simple lines. One afternoon, as the sun hid behind the Los Angeles rooftops, Ray began to pack her things. No arguments, no accusations. Only one look that contained everything neither dared to say. Neil stood in the doorway, knowing he had no right to keep her. Sometimes, he said later, love doesn't die. It just runs out of road. In 2008, after 12 years together, Ray returned to Australia. Neil stayed behind, older, quieter, walking through a house now full of echoes but short of someone to hear them. When asked about her years later, he smiled the smile of someone who had lived too much and understood everything too late. "I loved her with all my heart," he said. "Ray made me feel alive again." But sometimes love alone isn't enough. He had spent his whole life chasing noise, applause, headlines, endless tours. And then when the world finally quieted, love arrived softly as a whisper. Her name was Katie. Around 2009, Katie McNeil entered his life as part of The Job. She was hired as his tour manager. He was nearly 70, then face weathered, his hands already showing brief tremors, the early signs of a disease no one had yet named. She was 29 years younger, sharp, confident, shaped by years of handling pressure. But when she looked at him, she didn't see Neil Diamond, the icon everyone else saw. She saw a man who could still make jokes, still be gentle, still sing one more song for whoever needed it. "I wasn't looking for love anymore," Neil said. "But somehow it found me." Their connection grew backstage between rehearsals and tour meetings. She stood in empty arenas watching him adjust each line of a song until it landed just right. He looked up, caught her calm gaze, and smiled. Not the smile of an artist toward a fan, but of a man exhausted by pretense, finally meeting someone who understood the weight of perfection. Work turned into friendship. Friendship into something deeper, something that didn't need noise. They married in 2012 in a small ceremony under the California sun. No stage, no spotlight, just family, a few friends, and a man finally choosing peace over performance. Their life together slowed in a way Neil had never experienced. Mornings were just the two of them on the porch, sharing coffee, him strumming a few chords for fun without thinking about hits or charts. Music at this age was no longer for the stage, it was for the person sitting beside him. They walked in the garden, cooked simple meals, talked about ordinary things both of them had missed for years. Neil said something that made Katie laugh and cry at the same time. "She gave me back the feeling of being home." In their quiet house tucked into the Colorado mountains, they lived at a pace slow enough not to lose each other. On snowy nights, Neil would sing a few old lines, not loud, not perfect, and Katie would lean into him listening as if it were the first time. No stage, no lights, just two people who had finally found what they spent a lifetime circling toward a place to stay. And then before they could settle into that new life, another tragedy arrived. Neil's body began to betray him. The small tremors came quietly at first, like fatigue after a long day, but soon grew too clear to ignore. When the hands that had written countless melodies could no longer hold their familiar precision, they both knew something serious was coming. In 2018, the diagnosis arrived. Neil had Parkinson's. The disease did not strike like a blow. It seeped in slowly, coldly, relentlessly. It took the agility of his hands, the confidence in his steps, the sense of control he had relied on all his life. The man who once strode powerfully across stages now had to be careful just standing up from a chair. His voice still lived, but his body could no longer keep pace. "I didn't want to believe it," he admitted. For a long time, Neil tried to live as before, hoping he could outrun the illness trailing him, but no one outruns time. 2 years after the diagnosis, when he looked into the mirror, he no longer saw the version of himself he recognized. His hands trembled softly, his posture sagged, everything telling the truth he had avoided. Finally, with red-rimmed eyes, Neil did what he had spent more than half a century refusing to imagine. He left the stage. Reluctantly, he said, but added with quiet acceptance, "This is the hand God dealt me. I have to learn to live with it." When news of his retirement was announced, fans around the world cried because they knew that if his body had allowed it, he would have sung until his final breath. Today, at 84, Parkinson's has left its mark on every movement. His steps are slower, his gestures heavy, his voice softer. But in his eyes, a small, resilient light remains. Some days the disease is gentle, some days it is vicious. And even when his hands stiffen and his muscles resist, he still hums bits of old melodies. He sings not to perform, but to hold on to himself. "I still sing," Neil says, "because when I sing, everything inside me settles again." It is another kind of courage, quiet, without a stage, just two people, and long nights where his breath replaces applause. Now most of his days pass in the house on the Colorado mountainside, surrounded by thin mountain light and Katie's steady presence. Snow falls silently outside the window. Inside, the piano still waits. He writes when his hands allow, plays when his body permits. Some days the tremors are too strong, but he still places his fingertips gently on the keys as if greeting an old friend, reminding both himself and the instrument that music still belongs to him. And even as his strength fades, one thing in him has never stopped giving. He supports Parkinson's research tirelessly, quietly, without press, without applause, just sending funds, signing papers, helping labs trying to find answers to the disease that stole the steadiness of his hands. Neil also quietly donates to children's charities, cancer centers, disaster relief funds, and shelters for the homeless. No one knows the true amount because he never lets his name appear at the top of any donor list. A close friend recalled Neil always said he had received too much from life, and now it was time to give back. And perhaps that is the most beautiful part of him. When the stage was gone, he still found ways to make someone in this world feel a little less alone. Neil Diamond went from the damp, cold apartments of Brooklyn, from hungry nights in the Birdland attic, through a spinal tumor that nearly stole his legs, all the way to battling Parkinson's on a mountainside in Colorado. But he never once let life decide his final note. He chose to keep singing, keep writing, keep giving, as if every breath he had left needed to mean something. People call Neil a legend, not because of how many records he sold, but because after everything life threw at him, he still kept a heart soft enough to reach others. And if his story touched you even a little, leave a like or a comment. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this journey.